Welcome to another episode of Infographic Instant with Brian Michael. In this episode, we're going to be asking the question, does trade facilitation help reduce corruption? Now, before talking about the infographic, let's think a little bit about the theory behind trade facilitation and paying bribes to customs officials. Now, on the one hand, it might seem that facilitating trade by reducing the number of forms and steps required to import, export, or engage in other types of trade-related activities. So reducing these steps decreases the potential or the opportunities for customs officials to look for bribes. Because naturally, when you don't have 5 windows to visit in order to get stamps, that means that that's 5 less opportunities to pay a bribe in order to go to the front of the queue or to reduce processing times and so forth. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, the relationship might be that corruption merely shifts because of trade facilitation. Now, in this view, customs officials don't just throw their hands up in the air and say, "Oh, you know, you've got us. Because things are now so efficient and happy, we've decided not to collect bribes." Instead, they focus on other areas, such as looking for bribes in facilitating deposits and other payments associated with the import or the trade operation, and so forth. So in this second view, trade facilitation doesn't reduce the overall level of corruption, it merely shifts corruption to other areas of the customs administration. Now, let's turn our attention to the infographic, and we see no relationship between changes in improvement in trade facilitation and changes in corruption. So we are looking not at levels of corruption or not at levels of trade facilitation, but the way those variables change over time. And so we see that as countries increase their trade facilitation scores, we do not see decreases or increases in the proxy we use for corruption. Instead, there's either a completely vertical relationship at 0 or a completely horizontal relationship at 0 on the y-axis. So we see then that there seems to be no relationship between these variables, which makes sense if we step back and look at the broader picture that we are presenting in this paper. The infographic comes from a bigger study looking at the relationship between 3 variables: corruption in customs, the extent of trade facilitation, and administrative quality in a customs administration. And what we find in that broader study is that improving trade facilitation alone simply will not work. In other words, it simply will not decrease corruption. Customs directors need to engage in a big bang reform approach whereby they tackle administrative inefficiencies, activities or policies that hinder trade, and corruption. They have to focus on all 3 of these points at the same time. This has been an Infographic Instant with Brian Michael.